All right, everyone, welcome to Diversified, where our mission is to have you live in a life filled with wealth, health, and happiness. Today, we have a very special guest, the one, the only Carroll Golden. Carroll Golden is an executive and public speaker focused on improving the knowledge base of both financial advisors and their families about planning in advance for extended care needs. Carroll is also the author of an insightful book and a few others, How Not to Tear Your Family Apart, a guide that offers practical, financially sound strategies for families navigating the transition to becoming caregivers for aging parents. Mouthful, but how you doing there, Carroll?
Fascinating. I'm
Right.
doing very well. It's
Awesome.
always strange when someone tells you, who you are.
Right. Well, speaking of who you are, so you wrote this wonderful book. What inspired you to write How Not to Tear Your Family Apart? And follow up to that, yep, there it is.
Right
How
there
do
it
you hope,
is.
how do you hope it will help individuals and families who are facing the challenges of extended long-term care needs?
Well, the reason I wrote the book, frankly, is I had that experience. I had done what I thought was a very good financial plan for a couple, and he missed his annual renewal, comes in, he looked terrible. And I said to him, well, sit down. What is the matter? Turned out his wife had a stroke. And he was overwhelmed with modifying his house. She was a model. He wanted to keep her dressed and feeling life was worth it. Short tale, it destroyed the plan. We had tax implications. We had long-term effect on his legacy. So I thought, well, it's time to really share after this many years. What can we do to at least start and continue the conversation?
Love it. Not certainly not the story, but that you're bringing awareness to this topic. Of course, we talk to our clients about all the time, and it's a tough one, right? This is a tough one to recognize your mortality and to prepare for it, and worst case, spend money to protect it, right? So what when you look at planning, what role, and more specifically financial planning, what role do you think the extended care plan and education and process has there, and how do people best, in your opinion, integrate into their long-term care strategies?
Well, to begin with, what we all find is nobody wants to talk about longevity unless it's, I don't want to run out of money. But the other side of it is, yes, we've done a good plan. You won't run out of money. It's unlikely you will, but this could blow it up. So starting into the conversation, what I found was most people are not terribly comfortable with it because they just don't know a lot about it. There's a lot of bad press. So they immediately shy away from, I've heard things about that. So I devised these 3 steps so that advisors and families can say, okay, let's start with this care guide. And of course, in the book, immediately Grandpa says, excuse me, I have been taking care of Grandma and Mai for years.
Right.
And then the granddaughter says, well, isn't that the point, Grandpa? You just said you've been in control. And if we don't know what your wishes are, you're not going to be in control. And my mom is going to wind up having to make decisions, financial, health, happiness decisions, not knowing. So, of course, he thought through that. And the other key was, she said, Grandpa, we're all doing one, every one of us, because this is our family tradition and we value our traditions. And so you have these 3 steps, the care guide, then the care squad, because caregivers get overwhelmed.
So stay there for a second for me, Carol. Talk to me about the 3 steps, because that seems to be a big theme in your education, your coaching, your book. Give us the elevator description of it, if you could.
Okay, so the care guide, you do everything in there, including documentation and updates and so on and so forth. It can be done in writing, or there's an app for that. The care squad is to get the family so that when something happens, everybody has a role. Because when there's something negative or scary, if you have a role, I have a role, and our sister has a role, we are less likely to combat each other. We're more likely to work as a team. Plus, that does take some of the burden off the alpha child, or the one who is the caregiver. The third step is for companies and RIAs like you, where you say, so you don't know a lot about this. In the care planning team, it's generational. You want to get to know the other generation. One, you grow your practice. Two, this allows you to say, well, for the insured, there's this. For the uninsurable, there's that. For someone with budget constraints, there's this. So you're approaching it through this care planning team as an education.
As we get to the RIA and in the stage where you bring in help, financial help, in the sake of an advisor and guidance, what's your take on solutions? Are you a big proponent of long-term care insurance, hybrid type insurances that meld life insurance and long-term care together? I've heard people with many different views, and I know there's no one size fits all, but assuming affordability, what's your take on products out there to help protect? Because there's multiple angles and parts of this planning. One certainly is the financial.
Exactly. And I would say that I know hybrids have gotten very popular because it takes care of a couple of issues.
And hybrids meaning, for those watching, life insurance policies that also have long-term care components to it. So instead of standalone life insurance or standalone long-term care, it's a combined type of product. Okay.
Or an annuity that does the same thing. But we also talk about in the book, one of the characters' dad, he just needs short term. He doesn't have a lot of money. The average right now, according to the latest AARP study, is it's over $7,000 that a caregiver puts into the care of somebody who didn't have a plan, which also interferes with their career. I mean,
right. So it's not just affecting you, the senior, it's affecting your kids financially. Do you have the latest statistics, Carol, on percentage of people then end up needing assisted care in their later years?
Well, I've often seen the industry often says that 70% of people will need some level of care as they get older, because longevity is certainly here. Of course, when you look at some of the growing statistics on Alzheimer's, you look at some of the comorbidities that we have, people who say, well, I don't think it'll happen to me. I hope not. But self-insurance, there's no such thing, because insurance is a pooling of money. And if you're the one paying, the only pool is your pool.
Yeah, that's true. It can be a narrow pool. So, okay. So I'm with you. I talk to all our clients about this in some shape, way, or form, right? And people have various concerns on it. What I find is, depending what they've lived through influences their opinions, right? If they had mom and dad in a facility and it drained them dry, they're higher on it. If they didn't, they are less apt to be motivated. But let's ask a couple questions sort of in that theme. When do you think the appropriate age to start having this conversation? I mean, I'm 42. This isn't in I have other things to worry about personally, right? But when do you think that starting the engagement or your 3-step process makes sense?
Well, one, it depends on your client's health, which I know you deal with. And two, it depends on their wealth. How much could they fund before it really started to impact on them? So those two factors, but certainly someone in their 50s. I have a publisher who was trying to talk to her sister about her parents. And she said, my sister doesn't want to talk about it. I said, I'll mail her a book and we'll ask her, which character are you in here? Sometimes you can just say to a 50-year-old, have you heard a story about this? Some friend of yours' mother. But as you get near 58, 60, you start hearing a lot of stories. But by then, if you're using insurance, it can get expensive. Now, if you're, looking at, say, one of these HECMs, the reverse mortgages, or repositioning life insurance because they are selling their business, there's lots of different approaches and those milestones in their life, like selling their business or becoming a partner in a business. Good times to say, what's the effect going to be on the work that we do together?
Right. And I find that's about right. How I've approached it with my and our clients is kind of in the early 50s, start discussing it. Mid 50s, it's time to start possibly doing something. By mid to late 50s, if you're not doing something financially, you're losing optionality, right? You're pricing yourself out of a lot of options that may make sense for you, or you may have wished you had. And it's hard. It's a hard purchase for someone because buying something today that they may not, that they are admitting they won't need for 20 years, most likely, right? And that's a hard pill to swallow.
It is, but they're protecting what they do have today.
Right.
And most successful people leverage their money. They don't literally take dollar for dollar. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions. As you said, if you're talking to them in generalities and you say, so there are these cost of care things, where do you think you're going to retire? Take a guess. And then we look at the cost of care. I have found that clients are, you're kidding. And they have a bar. You can go out 10 years, go out 20 years.
Right.
And then I say to them, but let's not even do that. What if, how when we do financial planning, we say, what if something happened today? What if it was 5 years? And so on and so forth. I take that approach because you've taken that approach with them in their investing and in their savings. Here we are today. This is what it would cost. Where do we take the money from?
Totally makes sense. What are some misconceptions you find people have in this planning or just long-term care needs in general?
Well, first of all, they think that Medicare is going to pay for it, or God forbid, they think they want to spend down to Medicaid. My first thing I always say to them is just visit a facility. That'll cure them of that. They also think that we're trying to get them into something that has a very long pay, because not everything does. I mean, there are things where you pay and you finish paying and the protection is in place.
Sure.
I also think that thinking it won't happen to them because they haven't had an experience with them. I'll say something like, when you're out on the golf course, just ask your buddy, has he got a story he wants to share? Or I'll share a story with them. And, I always now bring up what the states are doing. Washington State, they're garnishing salary. California, they're going to show their plan or their feasibility of the plan this coming January. Minnesota's taken a different tact. They're trying to educate their consumers and protect them. And now the federal government has come up with this for Alzheimer's, this guide plan. So if the government, and especially the states, think you need this protection, do you really think it is financially more feasible for you to have your salary garnished? Or do you want to look at some options? We don't have to do this today, but we have to know what is the effect of the states and the federal, who are very aware of how costly all this is.
For sure. And here's a misconception that I get a lot. No, your spouse or your kids won't take you out back and shoot you. I've heard that more times than I can admit, or like to admit, and I've yet to find a spouse or an aunt or an uncle or a kid who takes poor old mom or dad out and, ends their misery, unfortunately, or fortunately.
I used to just say to them, if you ask an 80-year-old what they want, they say, I want to celebrate my 81st birthday.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I get that. Okay. So Carroll, this has been very enlightening. Leave us with and then I'll have you plug how people can get in touch with you. Leave us with the one thing you want people most importantly to take away from watching or listening to this today.
The most important thing is to take this taboo topic and find a way to start getting educated, to start talking about it, because you cannot jump into it and know immediately what's personally good for you. And I find that when you have a family that doesn't want to discuss it, the best thing to do is to say, well, okay, I'll have my advisor work with us. And all he's going to do is talk about things we ask about: the cost of care. What are my options? How young or how old do I have to be? And I think that puts the advisor, and it's a big emphasis of mine, you want to be generational. Right. You don't want to have to go out. You know what the statistics are about advisors being changed. You don't want to be one of those. You want to make sure that they don't come back to you and say, you dealt with risk. This was a risk. Why didn't you at least find a way, common ground, for us to say, let's talk a little about it just from an educational point of view.
I love it. Right. The hardest step is the first step. Or as they say, old Chinese proverb, journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And that necessarily makes sense here. Well, Carroll, this is enlightening. This is insightful. I know this will go over really well with our clientele, as this probably speaks to many, many of them. Of course, we help on one angle, but people like Carroll help on another. So feel free to reach out to us if we can help you address some of these things. But Carroll, let everyone know how they can get in touch with you, how they can find out more about your book, follow you, however you want to get your message out. So our lovely, wonderful listeners and clients and friends can take this, share it, learn from you, and continue this dialogue that you're so passionate about.
I have a website. It's www.thecaringconversation.com. And the book is available there. Of course, you'll order it. It'll come from Amazon, but it's also available in Barnes and Nobles and other outlets. But www.thecaringconversation.com.
That's awesome. So thecaringconversation.com. Check it out. We'll share it below. Check out Carroll's book if you find yourself or a loved one in this situation. Thank you, Carroll, so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And to our audience, if you enjoyed Carroll's message as much as I did, please share it, pass it on to someone you think will enjoy it. And again, we'll put all the links below. So thank you, Carroll.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed this.
Likewise. And as always, everyone, stay wealthy, stay healthy, and stay happy. Bye.